Laffey. He joins us every week at this time. SteveLaffey.com, author, filmmaker, former political candidate for president. And glad to have you, Steve. Brother, how are you?
I'm great, brother Jim. It's a wonderful day, and you got a great show. It's great. Of course, they all knew. Anyway, we thought it was something else, but I just sent you over a little text for the crowd. Never better. Remember the line? Joe Biden was never better. And remember I said on your show that before the debate that Trump accepted all the terms of the debate with no question, knowing that he would crush Joe Biden, knowing that when they turned off the mics, the Democrats are this stupid, that it would make Donald Trump seem even more reasonable, and knowing, as we talked about, you and I talked, that that Joe Biden could not keep it together for an hour or 20 minutes. And his famous quote that no one will talk about is that everybody's being raped here and there by uncles and brothers and whatever, right? I mean, he just went off on that, remember? That was when who's the guy on CNN? I forget his name. He's a black man, and he went to, he was like, it was over. He knew it was over then. And
I think one of the interesting things about that time in history, it hasn't been told yet, they're finally being honest about
sure.
He was demented and he was gone, and they were covering it up. But they said he was never better, but he wasn't. I think what's going to be interesting, remember that debate was the earliest ever, like in modern presidential history.
Yeah.
Someone had to agree to that. And I'm wondering, and just kind of up on the grassy knoll of conspiracy theory, if someone that wanted Joe Biden out said, we got to agree to a debate early so that if he's going to crash, we still have time to recover. Because if that debate would have happened, let's say in September or October, why did they agree to something so early? You wouldn't do that as the incumbent, but he did. And I wonder if that was a setup by somebody on his team.
I'm sure it was Obama behind the scenes because he wanted a real primary. Obama, to his credit, knew that Biden would get pasted. And he didn't want Kamala Harris, but they didn't go to the second step, which was the open primary immediately after the debate. Get all your grievances out, yell and scream, and then pick somebody like the governor of Kentucky or the governor of Pennsylvania, who was not included on the team. And then they could have won. But they refused. They are controlled. At least Republicans still seemingly want to win. This tax thing they're doing is not going to help them. But at least Democrats just simply wanted to placate these special interest groups that have taken over the party and throw out the union vote, which mostly went for Donald Trump.
Yeah. It's going to be that story's yet to be told. The story of cognitive decline and the story of we think he needs to be in a wheelchair, but can we hold out till November? All that stuff. That now is being told, and I think you're going to find out who the power that be that said, let's do this debate back in like June or so that, when he falls, we'll have time to recover, and that's what they did.
And the opposite is happening to the senator from Pennsylvania, who, when he was in cognitive decline, the big tall man, Fetterman, I was going to say Fentanyl. I was going to say fentanyl, but Fetterman, I was, because we can talk about that. But when he was really in decline, and we talked about this, and he couldn't function, and they all covered for him. But when he gets out to function semi-normally, and he supports Israel, right?
Yep.
And he will vote for Pam Bondi, and he will see all the people up, instead of criticizing him, I'm never going to talk to the potential appointees of the President of the United States in another party. Now, his former chief of staff says there's something really wrong with the guy.
Yeah.
That's the big story. And they all have the same story, that there's something wrong with Fetterman, when actually there was, but now it doesn't seem to be so much, just because he's being semi-reasonable.
Yeah, he's somewhat reasonable. Look at his voting record. He's still as left as ever, but you can have different voting opinions and still be a reasonable person and draw a different conclusion. And that's all he's done. He's still a left voter, but he's drawn some different conclusions.
But the anti-Semitic Democratic Party that controls Harvard doesn't want someone who's going to give Israel credence in the world. And Fetterman does.
Here's an interesting story as well that let me find it here if I have it here. Oh, there's a Democrat out there now as they're trying to fit. They got to trash Fetterman. They have to lie about what they knew about Joe Biden, and now there's a House Democrat that has decided here's their path to victory. It's a House Democrat will now introduce a reparations push.
Right.
That America has a moral obligation to Black Americans. So I'm thinking if the Democrat Party's team is trying to find a message to counteract Trump, the Republicans don't have to be on their A game, and I'm not sure they are, because And now you got somebody, a prominent Democrat, saying, well, let's run on reparations. Let's see if that gets anywhere.
Can you imagine seriously that if that were to pick up some speed and we head to next year and Trump's House members could be defeated because of bad economy, whatever would happen, right? And yet all they do is put up for a mostly white America and more than half the black people who don't even know what you're talking about reparations because they agree. Like, let me just say this status for all your clients. The oldest form of racism is actually reparations. It is holding people from the past who are not responsible, who are dead, but holding the people of their ancestors responsible for something they were not involved in at all. I'm Irish. I wasn't involved in it at all. Even if my grandparents were, which they weren't, I wasn't involved. What am I doing paying for it? That's not the rule of law. That's like saying let's not like Jews because they killed Christ. That's the oldest form of racism, right? And that's what the Democrats are guilty of. Anybody who brings up reparations is a racist and should be called out by all Republicans and all Americans as a racist and should be voted out of office because it is an ugly, ugly thing to bring up. And we've had since 64 now, right? I sent you over an article I wrote 42 years ago, but over 60 years ago, we had this war on poverty. We had all these bills passed, and the black family's been destroyed. That is the destruction of the black family, which to his credit, Donald Trump has done something about both in his first term and will try to do in his second term. And that's why more black voters are trending toward Donald Trump, if not Republicans.
Yeah. I've got problems. I was going through the stats that the Senate doesn't want to put spending cuts in place, Republicans in charge. The House has only gotten a handful of bills. I don't know what they're doing up there, but they're not passing bills. They have them out there. They're just not getting them out there. And so there's going to be some things that the Republicans could be vulnerable for next year for getting nothing done when they had the opportunity to get something done. However, if Democrats keep sending Jasmine Crockett, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and this jackwagon lady that wants reparations, the Republicans could be saved by the Democrats here.
Yes. That's the only thing that will save them. It'll be the stupidity of the Democrats by not appealing to some middle ground, whether it's regarding unions and right to work states or somebody. They simply still refuse to do this. And I guess they're going to continue that way.
Yeah. You mentioned something you wrote 42 years ago. You sent me a copy of it. I haven't been able to read the entire thing.
Okay.
Well, let's dive into it. The 41 years ago, Steve Laffey was already beating the drum that should be beat.
I wrote a book review in a newspaper that we started, the conservative newspaper at Bowdoin College called the Bowdoin Patriot 41 years ago, about a book called Tyranny of the Status Quo by Milton Friedman. And I hadn't looked at this in 25 years till my daughter had it out yesterday, this whole scrapbook that I had, this giant scrapbook of photos. And I'm like, wait a second. Like, I've been trying to tell you about the first 100 days for President Trump. Get something done, get legislation passed, which he refuses to do. But Friedman's talking about after 3 or 6 months, it's over for any president. And he's right about that. And then he goes into the reasons, right? You've got the special interest groups, talk about the pharmaceutical thing that Trump just did on Monday, which is an executive order rather than a legislation. What happened to drug company stocks? They went up. Why? Because there's no legislation against them. They know this was tried in 2020, and it won't stop the special interest, which is number one, the pharmaceutical industries, right? And we're talking about why this lady says what she says. She lives in a district where she can get away with it. That's how she says it. And so this is what's really happening with this country. But Friedman put forth like 3 or 4 things that should have been done that would have helped the country. And 80% of the people listening to this show, 80% of Americans would totally agree. And they were just this: a budget balancing over the business cycle amendment to the Constitution, a flat tax amendment, and having the Federal Reserve Board have a fixed rule for the growth of the money supply of roughly 3 to 5% per year. All of those things would have meant we would have avoided the massive debt we have, right? We would not have a Federal Reserve that we actually all focus on as more powerful than our Congress, right? Every day, every single day, all we talk about in the markets is the Fed. And we should never talk about them. They are complete clowns, just human beings, and they do a terrible job, and they're always late. And they've been late, and they've caused recessions. They caused the 2008 collapse. Every 15 years, they have to bail out banks, and they keep the CEOs in place rather than getting rid of them. And they do the same thing with airlines. All this actually happens. And Friedman talked about just changing this. So when you see that none of this has happened for 41 years, it is because the special interest groups rule. and because the uneducated American people don't know that if this was just done, we would have newspaper articles that would be like, wow, advances in science, not Trump doing this and Trump, we would have a whole different world if 4 of these things were just passed, but none of them have been. And that's the tyranny of the status quo. It's one of the best things I ever wrote, and it's only like 4 paragraphs.
I'm Steve Laffey, my guest. If you're listening later in the day, where we switch this over to a audio-only podcast, some of you are watching it live, but hundreds of you watch it every day, listen to it every day on the podcast platform. Steve Laffey, SteveLaffey.com. Steve, it's fascinating to. I heard President Trump yesterday talking about that executive order, and you're right. The Speaker of the House got to get his ass in gear and start putting a lot of this in law. They're not. I don't know if they're holding votes in the House of Representatives. I don't know what they're doing. They're just. They're negotiating and doing a markup on the big, beautiful bill, which is fine. But there's other things they can't walk and chew bubble gum at the same time. But it's fascinating. I heard President Trump in Saudi Arabia said one of the most complex things we face in these pharmaceutical things is that big pharma is a very big lobby, and they are very powerful in Washington, D.C. with the money they sling around. I heard him say that, and I said, oh, he said the quiet thing out loud. Between the military-industrial complex and the pharmaceutical industrial complex, that's who controls Washington, D.C., and that's oftentimes why Congress is so slow to do anything.
Yes, and let's go back over what President Trump wants, which is totally tremendous. You and I have talked about this for years. He wants American consumers of prescription drugs, for one, to pay no more than what they pay in Germany, which is far less. And the giant drug companies use America as their giant cash cow, and on the margin make tiny little money in Germany, a little bit in France, a little bit in the UK, because the drug prices are 1/5. They're 80% low on many of these drugs. So he does an executive order that says this has to stop. Well, it's not going to stop, right? This is the tyranny of the status quo. Just so everybody knows the numbers, because I'll give you the numbers that Trump won't. Last year, the drug companies were the biggest lobbyists in Washington at $327 million. That's a lot of money whipping around one Capitol. 2, they give huge amounts in unlimited quantities due to our campaign finance laws to candidates and politicians. They give them cash, they give them this, they take them on trips, they send them to different places, they pay for the trips. All this happens. It's at least $1 billion of lobbying efforts if you add it in together, right? So then you say, well, what do we really want? We want, for example, what do drug companies really do, folks? You may not know this. We have a patent system, but patents should last, say, 12 years. What do we have? We have the Orrin Hatch, Waxman, Republican, Democrat, all part of they passed that law that says, oh, if it takes you a little bit longer to get your patent through, we'll just give you more time. 2, what do they do with something called evergreening? Here's what they do. They know that the molecule could be used on another solution for another person, right? So they wait 4 years into the patent and they apply for another one that gets extended. The biggest example, and I'm just going to mention a drug that everybody knows is Viagra. Viagra should have come off patent and been generic 15 years before it was. But because they found it was used in, I don't even know what, right? It could be used on kids for this. It could be used on... This happens with all of our drugs. These things go on for 25 years, right? They fight and they go to court all the time. We need the President of the United States to go to Congress and pass a law that says, one, you can get your drugs anywhere you want, Joe. You get them in Canada, and there's no tariff on that one, right? If they're cheaper. You can't have them shipped in from Germany. We will change these patent laws. We will not have evergreening of you adding on to the patent. You get one shot, folks. Charge whatever you want for 12 years, from the day you apply to it to the day 12 years go by, and you're done. It goes over to Teva for generic making, and you can't fight it in court. These are the types of things, if we had, we would lower the prescription drug prices of our country. We all understand that if you come up with a great invention, right? And by the way, if the U.S. government is involved in that invention, they get money too, which is why the things we give to Harvard, we don't get anything back. We just don't. So all this could happen, but President Trump won't do it. Now, I'll give you an example. On this issue alone, if someone called me for the administration today and said, could you get 5,000 F-250 trucks to go with yours to drive across America to that state capital, to the United States Capitol in Washington, and go around and beep your horn until we pass this law? Mm-hmm. I actually could. If you live in Tennessee, when I lived in Tennessee, in Nashville, every once in a while, Jimmy, if you were a broadcaster in Nashville or in Memphis, or you would see that the late-term government would say, maybe we should have a state income tax, which they don't have. Everybody heads to Nashville. Pickup trucks, people shooting, they don't shoot off guns, they're shooting off horns, right? Blah, blah, blah. And everybody, you'd be announcing there if you were a Tennessee person. You would actually move you'd be live there. And guess what? They still don't have a state income tax. He could do this. And he refuses to because, again, he won't do the extra work. And he has to do everything. If he just did that, along with immigration, that would be a successful year.
I wish President Trump had someone on the staff saying, hey, let's do this extra work. But I also wish that Speaker Johnson and Leader Thune would also take a little bit of an aggressive stance and say, what are we doing here? We're sitting here navel gazing here in the House and Senate. It seems like the executive branch is moving fast, fast, fast. Some of it may be too fast and they're out from under their skis at times. But I still don't know what they're doing at the Hallowed Halls of Congress. I mean, when was the last time we heard they had a real important vote going on?
Never. How about Mike Johnson wake up this morning saying, you know what? I'll go see the president. He would love this idea. He liked Herman Cain. Herman Cain died at one of his rallies. Let's forget all this. Let's go with the 999 plan. Let's have let's go with the flat tax. Let's really do something, Mr. President. Do this thing with drugs, Mr. President. I love your executive order. We're going for legislation. Yeah. We're getting this. They refuse in the Congress. They're lazier than anybody. They're the laziest people. To his credit, Donald Trump is up early. He stays up late. He'll travel to different countries. He sort of meets with anybody. Yeah. He says things back and forth, which I disagree with, but at least he's going. Mike Johnson is nothing. He's a nothing burger.
Yeah. Let me go through this list here, and my other guest has not showed up, so we get bonus time with Steve. Yeah. Steve, this is, again, you don't have to like the end results of all of them, but think of the sleepy years of Joe Biden, sleeping by noon, pooping his pants by 2. I mean, just the whole thing that Joe Biden was doing. In the last several days, you had a trade deal with the UK, where it worked out. India and Pakistan go to ceasefire. Hamas hostages gets free. China, we can talk about that deal. Maybe it's a step in the right direction, maybe not. You got the trip to Saudi and Qatar, obviously a new level of respect. You have maybe Saudi Arabia entering the Abraham Accord. At the very least, a Rolling Stone gathers no moss, and you can't say the Trump administration is going to gather any moss. They're at least throwing stuff against the wall to see what works. And again, give me your thoughts on that, especially this China one. I know you're an expert on that topic.
Well, yes, and he is. Some of the stuff would be great if Saudi Arabia would be helpful in the Abraham Accords. There's a lot of good things that he does when he visits the Middle East, and his first, moving the embassy to Jerusalem. All these things were good. He takes his time too much, but then he throws in. Unfortunately, he went to these tariffs on China that made it that no trade would happen. And finally, again, Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, got to him and said, "Mr. President, you're going to have what Laffey talked about. I'm paraphrasing. You're going to have a negative 3% growth in the second quarter if we don't stop this nonsense now." But of course, unfortunately for Trump, he's seen as backing down to all these people. So he goes down to 30%. And Scott Bessent says the thing that he never should have said that really disheartens me, that we are, quote, not decoupling from China, end quote.
That Monday,
yeah, and so he should not have said that because that's the total throwaway. And we should be decoupling. And that's why I'm sure that other people around the president know that the way to have approached this was do China first, raise those tariffs, whatever you want, and suck it up if you have to. I would have been okay, just even though I said it takes several years. But make laws, again, even in this budget, where X% of semiconductors will be made in North America and only will be bought by the federal government. They buy a lot of semiconductors by 2027, whatever it has to say. And then there are laws. That way people who are investors say, hey, let's get that plant going. Let's do this over here. Let's do that over there. He didn't do this. And so what he really was doing, and they figured it out for him, that the lady or the person who sells stuff on Amazon who's been counting on making it in China, even though I disagree with this, she couldn't change in 3 months. Semiconductors will take several years. So I don't know how they're going to handle this in the future, but now other countries which have done real trade deals, the UK and India is a real trade deal. Us in the UK is simply like, let's go back to 10% and not talk about it anymore, right? So there's 90-day pauses everywhere, and unfortunately for Trump, he can't really go back. He can't really go back to 120. He can't because the markets will tank, and he cares about the markets. And at some point, unfortunately, Donald Trump is saying things that we all know aren't true. Gas is not $1.84. Scott Percent said the price of eggs has come down 85% the other day, quote unquote. I'm like, wait a second. I just went to Safeway. They're still $6. They weren't $47. What? They weren't. What? Why is it? But why are they saying things that are demonstrably not true? Because what happens to people who hear things, people who are really conservative, who love Trump, let's say, or really Republicans who are going to give him another chance, they're not hearing that. But the person in the middle doesn't care. It's like, wait a second, that's not true. I just paid $2.94 at, jug and whatever, right over here. So
The loaf and jug,
yeah, whatever. So they know these things aren't true. So someone should get to the president and say, you're doing some good things. Stop saying things and don't let your administration say things that are demonstrably false.
Yep.
Because it hurts him. I'm trying to help him, right? And
Yeah.
I would definitely be the guy to lead the charge, because you would have more people at the nation's capital. You'd have more people on a percentage basis than Andrew Jackson had swinging from chandeliers when he was inaugurated, right? Right? When everybody went down there and ate all the cheese and destroyed the White House.
Yeah.
You'd have more people at the Capitol if we were going to take on the drug companies as a nation as a whole.
Yeah.
You would. It'd be widely popular.
Steve Laffey, great to see you, my friend. SteveLaffey.com,
Love you, buddy.
Laffey, SteveLaffey.com. Love you, my friend. Talk to you very soon. Hey.
So anyway, great show by Jimmy, and I'm glad I could stay on a little bit longer. Beautiful day here.